Good afternoon. I am Maria Rosa Vaquerizo. I'm the CEO of the Andean American Associations. I would like to welcome you to today's program, hosted and organized by the Ecuadorian American Association. Today's program is Strategies for Growth with His Excellency Simon Cueva, Minister of Economy and Finance of Ecuador, and Benjamin Ramsey, Head of Latin American Economic Research at JP Morgan. Thank you so much to our wonderful speakers and to all of you for your participation. We are very excited to have over 320 registrants for this event. That shows a lot of interest in Ecuador. The Ecuadorian American Association was incorporated in the US in 1932, therefore becoming the first chamber of commerce for Ecuador in the US. Our association has hosted hundreds of programs with a constant emphasis in promoting Ecuador. I want to welcome a distinguished list of participants. This afternoon, we have Her Excellency Yvonne Baki, Ambassador of Ecuador to the United States. We have our institutional directors and sponsors. For the Ecuadorian American Association, we have today with us Arthur Barnes from Deltec Asset Management, Fidel Esteban Egas, Leadership Circle member, Banco Pichincha, Kelly Librera of Winston and Strong, Nelson Baldion, sponsor, Ramiro Crespo, President of Analytica. We have also from the Colombian American Association, Stephanie Younger-Mote, President, and Ana Blanco, Vice President, and Maria Cecilia Riseco, Director. For the Peruvian American Association, we have Director Cynthia Urda Cassis. She's an Andean Sustaining member from Sherman and Sterling. We have representatives from major banks, such as Scotiabank, Bank Trust, Barclays, Credit Suisse, Danske Bank, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, MUFG, Produbanco, Rabobank, Sumitomo, UBS, and Wells Fargo. We also want to welcome multinational institutions and key institutions such as the World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, International Labor Organization. Also, thank you for participating. The rating agencies we have here today, Fitch Ratings and S&P Global. And thank you to the press. Your job is amazing, and thank you for joining us in every program. We have today with us Bloomberg, Financial Times, Latin Finance, MSN, among others. From academia, American University, Georgetown, and MIT. We have a very extensive list, so I want to welcome every one of you, every and each one of you, and thank you for your interest in our programs. After the discussion, you will be able to ask questions of the speakers. If you look at the bottom, there is a chat button, and you just have to press that button and write all the questions that you want, and they will be addressed at the end of the presentation. We obviously cannot address every question, but we will try our best. And now it's a pleasure for me to present the President of the Board of the Ecuadorian American Association, Juana Caicedo Selinger. She's a Senior Vice President at UBS Financial Services in New York. Juana, the floor is all yours.
Okay. Thank you, Maria Rosa. Good afternoon. Welcome to our program with the Minister of Economy and Finance, and to a time of new opportunities for Ecuador. We are very optimistic with a new government that can attract investment and create broader prosperity for the country. Thank you, Minister Cueva, for taking your valuable time to be with us today, and Mr. Ramsey for accepting to moderate this program. We have a great turnout and look forward to your remarks, dialogue, and question and answer session. I am pleased to introduce to you both of you. Mr. Simon Cueva was appointed Minister of Economy and Finance by President Lasso in May of this year. He's an engineer from the École Polytechnique de Paris and an economist from the National School of Statistics and Economic Administration of France. He holds a doctorate and master's degree in economics from the University of Paris. He has served as a senior economist and representative to Bolivia for the IMF. He was Director General of Studies and Director of Financial Programming of the Central Bank of Ecuador, as well as Director of the think tank TNK Economics in Quito. He served as a consultant for the World Bank, the Organization of American States, the Andean Community, the Latin American Reserve Fund, and the United States Agency for International Development. He was the academic director of the Development Studies Corporation. In addition, he has served a very distinguished academic career at highly regarded universities in Ecuador and France. Ben Ramsey heads the JP Morgan Latin America's Economic Research Team and is the chief economist for the Northern Andean region. Ben first joined the JP Morgan Chase Emerging Market Research Team in 2000, and in 2002, he joined the JP Morgan Chase, working for the JP Morgan Sao Paulo office. He has covered sovereign credit events and restructuring in the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, and Venezuela. He has consistently been ranked for Latin America and Andean economics coverage by institutional investors, and has been recognized for several forecasting awards from Consensus Economics. He holds an MA in International Economy from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Ben speaks Spanish and Portuguese. Now I'm handing the floor over to Ben. Please, Mr. Ramsey, just take the word from me.
Thank you very much, Juana. Thank you very much, Maria Rosa. I want to congratulate you both on your leadership of the associations over the years, through times which have been good and times more difficult. Your work to always bring the important issues of the countries of the region to the public here in New York and beyond is exemplary, and just congratulations. I want to thank you on behalf of myself and JP Morgan for the opportunity to help lead this discussion. So without further ado, we will turn to Minister Cueva, who will deliver a presentation, after which I will help guide a conversation. Once again, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be happy to receive your questions. And with that, Minister Cueva, we're all very anxious to hear your words. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you, Juana. Thank you, Maria Rosa. Thank you, the Ecuadorian American Association. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll present, and I'll try to go quickly in some slides so that we can leave some room for questions and answers. It's a pleasure to be here. We just turned the first 100 days of President Lasso's administration. It has been a very hectic and interesting time. And so we're trying to build a better future for our country and to ensure that Ecuador will become a bright spot in the region. So just to go quickly, I will first turn to some weaknesses of Ecuador economy even before the pandemic, then going quickly through the pandemic time, and then stating some of the main issues for the new administration economic program. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that Ecuador is a country that has been highly reliant on oil prices, and that its economy has been hugely reliant on it. Growth has been typically high in periods of high oil prices, like the recent, super cycle of commodities. But once that ended, Ecuador's economy has been growing at very low levels, close to 0.5% in real terms. And its real growth has been highly correlated to oil prices. If we go to the next one, the other part is that we lose as a country the opportunity to create a more sustainable economy during the oil price boom. Typically in that boom, government revenues went up quite a lot. but government expenditures also were increased even more so. So we moved from like 20-25% of GDP expenditure levels to above 40% of expenditure levels and then once the oil prices started to come down, the country faced a heavy time trying to reduce its expenditures, and that has led to large amounts of fiscal deficits, which basically were financed through international debt issuances in markets, and also you can also see that in the next slide, through bilateral debt and also the monetization of fiscal spending, even though we are a dollarized country. So you can see public debt has been going up quite importantly in recent years, wasting a bit that large opportunity that the country had to make it more sustainable over time. In addition, and you can see that in the next slide, the country used a large share of liquidity from the central bank to channel it to central government bonds. And so that provoked, probably in a pre-electoral period, some boom in the credit and deposits, but it was a very short-lived period. And so that has led also the central bank to have weaknesses in its balance sheet and its ability to face short-term obligations with liquidity, with liquid assets. Finally, if you can see the external side of the economy, Ecuador continues to be in the next slide. Ecuador continues to be a country that is heavily dependent on primary products for exports. That is not necessarily a bad thing, but indeed it has been heavily reliant on primary products. And in terms of destination of non-oil exports, Asia, and in particular China, has become a more important player in recent years, like for shrimps, bananas, and other primary exports. So this is more or less how the country received the pandemic. If we can go to the next slides. The COVID pandemic was a very strong shock and causes a systemic risk for the economy. You can see in the next slide that you will see several ways of seeing how the economy was badly hurt by the pandemic, both in terms of a real GDP decline. That quarterly decline that you can see there was the toughest decline we have had since we have statistics in the country. Oil production also fell in part because of some more local issues, and that coincided with this dramatic fall in oil prices. So the country risk went up tremendously and only managed to come down even at high levels after the country went through a debt restructuring a market-friendly debt restructuring in the markets. Credit during the pandemic went down and has just started to recover, while deposits, like in some other countries, have been building up after a small initial decline as banks went liquid, but have been lacking opportunities to get credit-worthy businesses. Finally, international reserves went to a historical bottom before starting a program with the IMF that has helped the country recover throughout the pandemic, and that was critical to avoid any more tragic situations for the economy. The other truest outcome of the pandemic that you can see in the next slide is that you have a country that already highly unequal since the beginning. Okay, then you can see the income per capita income distribution according to the latest statistical agency survey in December 2020. But the average income loss over the year of the pandemic between December 19 and December 20 was much more targeted to low income people and much less to high income individuals. The next slide also shows a sort of focus in the highest decile, in the richest decile, and you can see that likely the 4% higher of the population was the one least impacted by the pandemic. So on top of growth issues and sustainability issues, the pandemic has hit very harsh the lowest range of our citizens. And that is obviously a situation that we need to take care of going forward. If we can go to the next slide, you can see that Ecuador has been very successful since President Lasso came to office in building a very strong and dynamic vaccination plan. The promise of President Lasso was to vaccinate 9 million of our citizens over 100 days. It was something that was by many seen as an impossible task. And actually, we already reached the target. We got today with the president a public event to congratulate the country for this effort. You can see that Ecuador has been a very successful and has been a country that probably near world level records in terms of how quickly we have been able to recover in terms of vaccination. This chart is from a few days ago. I think if you will chart it today, Ecuador has already reached the same level of percentage of its population fully vaccinated as the United States of America. So this has been a tremendous achievement. And this has helped a lot starting a recovery of the economy. You can see in the next slide, some short-term indicators, high frequency in terms of how things are recovering. You can see in domestic sales, you can see how VAT collections are coming back to historical levels. You can see that inflation that was going through a long period of deflation has started since July and August came back to positive territory. Formal employment under Social Security, July was the first month where you had an annual increase in formal employment since early 2019. Non-oil exports, which has been performing pretty well during the pandemic, continue to recover. And the referential corporate interest rates are starting to show a significant decline, showing that liquidity in the economy and the financial sector is starting to yield some results in terms of how to get back to normality somehow. So if we can go to the next slides, the other part is, well, the country risks, okay, country risks went down since President Lasso elections and have been pretty much stable since, but Ecuador still has levels of country risk that are pretty high, and our sovereign risk need to be taken down tremendously if we want really to achieve our goals. That is to make this economy grow sustainable, to recover strong levels of high quality employment, and to ensure a gradual return to fiscal stability, to fiscal sustainability, and to ensure that our population is better served by the state. Going forward, we can go to the next slides. Please go ahead one more. As you all may know, we announced yesterday that we reached a fund staff agreement, a fund staff level agreement with the IMF, so as to revise the current existing program. We strongly value the support of the IMF and all the international community through this crisis, and we expect to get the best possible relations with the international community. Our baseline scenario implies getting back to average growth levels in Latin America. You can see that during the pre-pandemic and pandemic, Ecuador has growth levels that are way below even Latin American averages. And we expect at least to come back, and the government expect to surpass these levels through a very aggressive program of economic reforms that could help us attract private investment, that could help us open more the country to the world, reach several trade agreements. We already announced a return to ICSID in a few weeks ago. And we expect the country to really start a moment of strong economic recovery so that we can help our population getting back to sustainable income and revenue. So this is a strong challenge for President Lasso's government, but we believe we have started with the right foot. We believe we have shown the country that we can actually implement promises like for the vaccination plan. And the next big challenge will be how to ensure a sustained economic recovery. So the fund agreement will be a very important part of it. We expect, as a government, we have the goal to reach at least fiscal surpluses for the central government through the remainder of the presidential period. And we expect to get even a fiscal balance for the non-financial public sector, not only the central government, but the whole non-financial public sector, starting next year. What has been somewhat changed with the fund, within the fund program and with the fund objectives, is that we expect as an administration to get through this fiscal consolidation a bit more through the expenditure reduction and a bit less through revenue consolidation. One of the main reasons for that is that we don't want to hurt the economic recovery, and at the same time, we want to ensure that the fiscal reforms we need to pass can be approved through a fragmented Congress and through a quite challenging political situation, which is, as of now, pretty similar to what many other of our countries in Latin America face, though the kind of government you have may be different in other countries. The other part of the program, besides fiscal consolidation, you can go to the next slide, will be also strengthening the balance sheet of the central bank. As explained, the international reserve coverage of monetary liabilities of the central bank have been going down for quite a long time. It has started to be to recover with the new fund support. And we have a very important repayment schedule of public debt held by the central bank, according to the new monetary law that was approved a few months ago. The Ministry of Finance cannot anymore roll over any existing debt to the central bank when they come due. That means that on top of fiscal consolidation, the central government needs to get a strong support and a strong effort to repay in cash the central bank and to gradually rebuild the central bank balance sheet. As an example, in 2021, we will end up the year repaying the central bank around $700 million, which is relevant for Ecuador. On top of that, well, for this year, we just received, and we're changing that to dollars as of today, the new SDR issuance from the IMF. We will get around $950 million as of today. On top of the fund program support, envisages a fund support of about 1.5 billion for the remainder of this year and another billion for next year. And the fund program also is a catalyst for support from other international organizations, including World Bank, IDB, CAF, FLAD. And we expect to get about 4.5 billion in total from the international community from now through the end of next year. So this is a very exciting news for us, that we reach a fund staff level agreement, that we can continue and we can count on the international community to ensure fiscal consolidation, to ensure a strong change for the stability of the country, and to ensure a program that will be credible internationally and will ensure a sustainable country. If you can go to the next slide, one of the other challenging issues for Ecuador is the labor market. As you can see, about 2/3 of the Ecuadorian economically active population is under what we call inadequate employment, which is basically informality, underemployment, or low wages employment. That means that we have a very large part of the population that is not covered by any social protection mechanism. And one of the things we face and the challenge we face is how to help that population get back to a more formal employment environment. These adequate employment levels are particularly low for women and for youth people. So those are the ones that are more hurt by this informality. And that's why we need to push also for labor reform that will help this part of the population getting back to more protective levels and more formal levels in the labor front. On the trade front, in the next slide, you can also see that though, Ecuador has seen some multilateral exchange rate appreciation in recent years, obviously changing with the US dollar fluctuations as we are dollarized. But it's also true that Ecuador non-oil exports, despite some rebound in recent months, still need a strong push, and we still need to open more our economy and trade so that we can push more the balance of payments and we can push more the dynamics of our non-traditional and non-oil exports. If you go to the next slide, you will see also that two key sectors for Ecuador, oil production and mining, need a strong boost for private investment. Private investment will be critical for us to recover and to aggressively increase oil production levels, and also mining exports. Mining have been going very positively, mining exports, but those are for now just relying on two big projects. And we expect Ecuador that it can be a strong recipient of investment in the mining sector, together with the oil and energy in general sector, also clean energy sectors. So this can be very helpful in an environmentally friendly way for the economy to recover, for growth to recovery, and for employment to recover. If you go to the next slide, you can see that private investments have recovered somewhat in recent years, but are still at limited levels. And if you see FDI for Ecuador still has pretty low levels of the compared to other countries in the region. And we need to do a strong effort to recover that, to open that, and to pave the way for Ecuadorian economy to be the new cherished country for international investments in the region. We believe that at the moment, with the current administration, somehow we are a sort of exception for now in the region compared to other countries, and that we expect, and we have already seen a strong external interest to build new investments in key sectors in the economy. So just to summarize in the following slides, the main areas where we plan to do our key economic reforms. So first area is how to build opportunities for all for employment and social protection. That passes through a modernization of the labor market, ensuring that the labor framework is more conducive to formal employment for, in particular, for women and youth. We have launched a very strong program to fight chronic malnutrition in children. Ecuador, according to international comparisons, is one of the countries in the region with the lowest levels of good nutrition, let's say, for children. So this is a critical issue for us in terms of recovering opportunities for the future of our children. Part of it is also narrowing the social gap, as you have seen. So that will mean that we will promote a progressive fiscal reform that will help that those having more and pay could help more in the economy in order to support social protection policies that are growing for the most vulnerable population. As of now, our conditional transfer programs cover around 500,000 families, more than it was covering 1 year ago. So now our social protection programs cover about 1.5 million families in the country. And that will go ahead also with the restriction of the social bonds program, so to ensure that it goes strictly to most needed population, and that we target it every day better. In the next slide, you will see the other part of, a second area of reforms, the one on healthy public finances, that will be based on efficient tax collections. We already put together a large taxpayer unit at the IRS, at the local IRS. The IRS also agreed on tax information exchange programs, both with the US and through CAM, with over 130 international jurisdictions. So that should help us ensure the enforcement of tax collection appropriately. And that should help that the country ensure that all its citizens pay the fair amount of taxes they need to pay. We will also try to push for a more progressive tax system. We will try also to promote by legal frameworks the disclosure of undisclosed foreign assets for Ecuadorian residents. And we're trying to ensure fairness in the fiscal treatment that will pass us through reducing some exemptions or exceptions for some of the either personal or corporate income tax. And finally, we plan to gradually enforce fiscal rules because Ecuador has lacked in the last 10 years proper fiscal rules that will help the country ensure in the medium term that we maintain a credible fiscal system. In the next slide, you can see the other big part of the effort that we need to achieve for the fiscal side, which is an austere and efficient public sector. That will need to ensure transparent procurement processes. We're getting international also technical assistance to ensure stronger use of economies of scales, programming purchases, combat corruption and disorder in public contracts. This is a large part of what we can do to combat corruption and to ensure more efficiency in the public sector. We have also developed several areas where all the entities that fight corruption and that control the proper procurement process will be strongly coordinated. So to fight that, we are pushing for a law to reform public companies that from now have been pretty inefficient and in many cases lack audited financial statements. So we ensure their increased financial autonomy and we ensure they are not draining on public resources. And we expect to gradually build a reduction in the size of government in terms of holding back spending, avoiding all wasting resources, and review it thoroughly how we can ensure a more efficient public government that will still deliver the proper services that its citizens needs and deserves. Another big area of reform in the next slide is, as President Lasso says, we want more Ecuador in the world and more world in Ecuador. We want to ensure that Ecuador is more present in the world. We want to negotiate free trade agreements. We already have a free trade agreement with the European Union. And we are working with Mexico, with the Pacific Alliance, with the USA, and more recently with China in reaching free trade agreements with all these countries. We already implemented a first reduction of import tariffs to help the competitiveness of local industry and exporters. We plan to gradually phase out a capital outflows tax as public finances will allow us, so that we reduce one of the deterrents for international investment in the country. And we have already announced and completed a return into exit to ensure more security to foreign investors to invest in Ecuador. We're waiting for rules for everybody. Another area will be also different efforts to support businesses and entrepreneurship in the country. That's in the next slides. Part of the progress there are in helping lowering red tape and production costs, developing public-private partnerships. A new secretary under the presidency has been put together to promote private sector participation in most sectors in the economy, while at the same time the Ministry of Finance will preserve its evaluation of fiscal contingency risks so that we ensure that public-private partnerships or concessions will be done in a sustainable fiscal way. We also expect to increase our production. We already get a commitment from private companies working in the country to help us increase by around 10% oil level productions by the end of this year. And we expect to attract much more international capitals so that we can do a much more sizable increase of our production. And we're promoting the development of an environment-friendly mining sector. Again, we have had very constructive and very positive relations with mining oil companies in the country that have already announced several decisions to increase their investment already in the country. In other parties, how to get to more modern financial markets in the next slide. There we need to face three main areas. The one is public banks. As of now, we have a couple of public banks that are weak, that have weak results and weak problems. We intend to move public banks towards a sort of more modern, transparent management, and to ensure that we get a modern financial system through public banks, through to convey international financing through the local financial sector in a proper and orderly way. We plan to develop a more orderly and systematized domestic debt market. Ecuador domestic debt market is still very thin, and we need to ensure a more predictable strategy in the domestic market, a deeper domestic market, but also to build a more predictable international investor strategy for the government. So we plan to work on both levels and to ensure that we will get a more transparent, a more predictable, more orderly capital market. Finally, we also want to support financial inclusions. Still, about 50% of Ecuadorian population is not covered by financial development. So there's a lot to be there, in particular for small and middle enterprises, so to ensure the integration of formal credit markets that are currently excluded from that market, and that leave many of those debtors in the informal economy and the informal debt system, which are typically very expensive and not very friendly for the creditor. And finally, the last slide, we want to support a stronger dollarization system. The central bank is being strengthened. The new law already gives the central bank autonomy. The new boards, both for the central bank and for financial regulation, will be appointed in the coming weeks. They have already been sent to Congress and need to pass through the congressional approval. That will help increase the autonomy and the technical capabilities of the central bank. And as indicated before, we're also helping through the finance ministry to rebuild the liquidity and the assets of the central bank, so that it becomes stronger, and it will help also the local financial system to get more liquidity, more available liquidity through that way, and so to be able to increase the credit markets. Finally, a part of that dynamism should help also in terms of boosting the domestic financial markets, and to continue reducing interest rates, which is a trend that has already started, but needs to be pushed much further. I hope that gives you an overview of where we are. It's still early for a government, but I believe that in 100 days we have achieved quite a lot of things already. And I'm sure that with the help from the international community, Ecuador can become a bright spot in the region and can help attracting more and more investors to our country for the benefit of our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Cueva, for that comprehensive presentation. It's a comprehensive agenda. It's a laudable one. It's an ambitious one. So maybe we can get into a bit of a conversation about how we get from here to there in terms of achieving the agenda. I've already received a number of questions on the screen, on the chat, from the Q&A component, so happy to continue to receive those. We'll try to touch on as many of them as we can. You know, the growth agenda is, you know, I think clearly from a market perspective, one which is pointed in the right direction. But as you've mentioned, you know, the Achilles heel lately of Ecuador has been fiscal financing. And I think we sort of do have to make sure that the wheels are on the car, so to speak, before we can try to drive it with the growth agenda. So maybe you could just help us understand a little bit, you know, where things stand in terms of this year's budget, next year's budget. I know there's been a staff level agreement with the IMF. Congratulations on that. I know the board is yet to approve it, and we may need to wait to see some more details as they're spelled out in that agreement. But there has been a budget, a multi-year budget proposal. This is a part of the interim transition period. You had to do this, and you'll put your own budget in the coming month or so. But in terms of what we can see from those numbers, targeting a fiscal deficit this year of 4.8 billion, amortizations of over 5 billion. So there's significant financing needs approaching now from just those numbers, 10 billion. Maybe you could just help us understand sort of what from here, speaking of September to the end of the year, what are the residual financing needs and what have you already covered? Obviously, you've mentioned the IMF. Between the SDRs and the disbursements associated with the program, there's around $2.5 billion there, presumably coming this year. What type of arrears are we still looking at, and how much could those be reduced in the course of this year? And there, our residual financing needs, can we quantify them, and how much would be other multilaterals? To sort of understand a bit, you know, the 4.5 billion, how much is, maybe 2.5 billion is the IMF between this year and next. 2 billion other multilaterals. How much, you know, how should we think about the sequencing of those flows of financing sources? And I think you're on mute, Minister.
Okay, sorry for that. Okay, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think for this year, with the fund agreement in the rails now, and yes, the fund will be convening its board probably likely by the end of September to discuss Ecuador's program. So that would mean that we will likely get a sizable number of disbursements from October through December. We already have pretty advanced conversations both with the IDB and the World Bank, CAF, FLAT. In some cases, some credits have already been approved and are coming to Ecuador in the coming weeks. We got already from CAF about 200 million credit to support chronic malnutrition systems. A new credit, a freely disposable credit of about 275 million just approved by CAF. FLAT already approved a 300 million credit in recent weeks. And the IDB and the World Bank are expected to approve PBL, I mean, freely disposable loans for about 100 million each in the coming months. So all that will be representing a sizable amount of liquidity on top of the fund, 1.5 billion for this year, plus the 1 billion from the SDRs. We have also been able to secure some domestic support. The domestic financial system has been interested enough in credible policies, so to help us with transition financing while we were closing the fund agreement. That was about 100 million. And part of that is being rollover as obviously all is in a voluntary way. So we believe that as of now, we will be able to cover all our financing needs through this end year with the agreements. We won't need Ecuador to go to markets or anything like that in the meantime. Probably likely the deficit at the end of the year, the central government deficit will likely be below this 4.8 billion. Will be probably, when you see the way that public sector ends up actually implemented public investment trends and everything, will probably be closer to 4.2 billion by the end of the year, okay? So, and it's also true that within Ecuador, the non-financial public sector tends to have lower deficits than the central government. So that also gives way to some intra-public sector financing from excess liquidity institutions to the central government. So that will help us go in that way. For next year, I mean, we expect still to have quite a lot of international financing and official international and bilateral and multilateral. We are already in talks with China to ensure a friendly debt discussions for debt renegotiation. China has been very open for that. President Lasso has had several talks with the Chinese president, and China is open to continue discussions in that regard. So we're already working in that direction, and we expect likely Ecuador to go back to international financial markets sometime next year, but we want to do it in a very orderly and predictable way. And we expect, obviously, the country's sovereign risks to be down by then quite more. So we believe as of now that this agreement with the fund and all these progresses pave the way to an orderly way to ensure an improvement in financing and a better way to do it. It's also true that debt restructuring that Ecuador achieved last year has helped also reduce the need for amortization in international markets in the coming years. So this administration will benefit from that, and that is helping us also postponing part of those amortizations.
And I know you mentioned interpublic sector, but just in terms of arrears levels and targets, and then maybe I can just ask you related to that, the case with Perenco. Is there any update in terms of the negotiations in terms of that liability?
Yeah, on arrears, yeah, we have some level of arrears, most of it within the public sector, from the central government to other institutions within the public sector. We're making progress in that regard this year. When we arrived, we were almost 3 months late to local governments. As of now, we're close to be in time with our payments to local governments. We are discussing with the Social Security how to ensure an orderly repayment of some of the central government obligations to them. And we have some obligations to the private sector. The expectations is to maintain, at least for the year, the same levels of arrears to the private sector, so not to increase them, but rather to reduce them over time. Regarding Perenco discussions, we have had constructive discussions with them. We're in the process of discussing and continuing the better way to achieve that and finalize. We have had some discussions of trust-related obligations, both on one way and on the other. But we expect as a country, and we plan to fully be able to close on our commitments. I do not go further there because we're within the negotiations, so obviously I cannot go further than that.
There's a number of, we could go down this rabbit hole of financing and financing sources for a while, but there's a lot more to talk about. So let me turn a little bit to, and trying to capture some of the questions we've received to the reform agenda. So again, just as a reference to the budget, and again, knowing that it's not set in stone, there is the idea that revenues will be increased in an important way between 2021 and 2022, almost $2 billion. So, how much of that is just leveraging better growth? How much of that is the ambitions of a tax reform? We know you've been discussing that a tax reform is going to be part of the reform agenda. So maybe you could just give us an idea of sort of what you can in terms of content, timing, sequencing with other reforms such as the labor reform that's been put on the table. And of course, the most critical question at the end of the day, the political strategy here. We know that the president doesn't have a majority, far from it, in the assembly. He's already mentioned just in recent days the idea of a popular consultation as a potential tool in the toolkit if need be. So what can you tell us in terms of, again, the content of reforms, the sequencing, and the strategy?
So yeah, in terms of revenue and contents, basically we expect several areas to boost revenues from this year through the next one. The first one is that economic recovery is on track. is coming, and that should help a lot getting back. Remember that this year we have had almost half of the year with very low tax revenues, and also close to half of the year with relatively low oil revenues. So both should next year will be more as a full-fledged terms, and that would be an important part of it. The other part is that we're already getting results from tax administration measures, both of IRS and local customs. We plan to continue boosting that, and that is already making waves. Just to give an example, the IRS collection has improved this year about 400 million from past due collections that has already been cashed in this year, just to give an idea of how this is actually helping. Now, it's true that beyond that, we will have a fiscal reform. We expect to send Congress a fiscal reform that will include both permanent taxes and more transitory support measures. So it's a bit difficult, and I don't want to go into too much detail for now. I think we need to finalize the legal framework, so to send it to Congress, but it will include both of that. We expect the next legal project to be sent to Congress within the month of September. So this is in the coming weeks. The president has already discussed this idea of sending not a tax project, but a project that will be more comprehensive, that will include several areas, that will include labor reform areas, and that will include some other areas to support a higher role of private investment in the economy, and probably a few more areas that could help supporting that agenda. That brings us to the political aspects of it. Indeed, Ecuadorian politics are complicated. They have always been, so I mean, this is not new for the country. So this is a fragmented Congress, but at the same time is a Congress where we are able to gradually work with them, despite, you know, the official noise and the political noise that typically goes out. Just an example, the budget for this year, which, as you mentioned, is a very transition budget because it's really just to close this budget in an election year for the remainder of the year. So it's a budget for almost 3 months or something like that. So it's not so relevant in that regard. And it won't show exactly the whole amount of reforms and programs for the government. But the budget went through the Legislative Commission and got approved. And now it's in the General Chamber of Congress. We have had already several conversations with some of the parties in Congress, and we're getting close discussions with them. Obviously, there are different political views, but I think there are more bridges that can be built than are apparent from the external, you know, the media and what is conveyed public in the press. So I'm more confident that we can build that way. That doesn't mean that we don't have other tools. As you mentioned, if this important reform law, this opportunity law, would have breaches, we have several political tools on that. The government has always a system of partial veto in Ecuador that can help because to overturn a veto, you need a qualified majority. So that implies the need for a smaller majority in some cases. And as the president has mentioned, there are a couple of other options within the legal and constitutional framework of the country that the government is ready to use if needed, but we expect to build enough bridges not to get to that level and to be able to pass it. Now, as you know, in Ecuador, you have a system where you can send a law with an emergency framework that gives Congress a shorter timeline to approve it, with typically 1 month to discuss it and approve it. If not treated or approved by Congress or rejected, then it can be approved by what we call here the ministerial ley. So by the lapse of time approval, let's say that. So let me stop there, just not to go into too much details. But.
Sure. And I'm also cognizant of the time here. We do have a number of questions, and let me try to sort of wrap a couple into one or two. So we have questions. I mean, questions about the status of fuel subsidies for one. So there's obviously been some forward progress made under the last government, but this was clearly a very politically sensitive topic. So, you know, how much more do you think can be done on that front? How much is that as part of the strategy? And let me just sort of merge that with another, broadly merge this with another oil question, which is really the oil production strategy. So the president has announced an ambitious plan to increase oil production. If you could just maybe be a little bit clear in terms of how this will take place. Is it going to be new oil concessions, a different service contract model? What are the plans in terms of, you know, basically making extracting Petroecuador as an integrated company with what was Petroamazonas, upstream, downstream, from the government budget, and making this at some point its own standalone state-owned company that possibly could go to capital markets to, you know, finance its own capex? I mean, what's, I guess, how can you enumerate the plan?
Okay, quite a lot of issues there. Let me see if I forgot the first one.
Well, we had a question on fuel subsidies from the audience.
Okay, that's clear. Yeah, on fuel subsidies, the president has been very clear in public and also in private discussions with the transportation sector that oil subsidies in Ecuador, in particular for gas and diesel, are very regressive subsidies that are targeting higher levels of society and that are also helping counterbalance and in sometimes drug trafficking. So we intend to reduce and to gradually eliminate those generalized oil subsidies. We have a system through a monthly, monthly changes of local oil derivative prices. This is continued. The government has not changed any of that and will continue maintaining that. And at the same time, we are having pretty constructive discussions with the transportation sector, so to find ways to ensure a more targeted subsidies that will help, in particular, the public transportation system, because this is a sector where final prices are controlled, and we don't want to hurt the population in terms of public transportation prices. So we're in the current discussions on the areas. They have been much more constructive than initially expected. And we expect to continue that way and hopefully to send a positive message at some moment that we can go even faster than expected. But for now, our plans and our fiscal plans are built on a more conservative trend. Same happens with the oil production. Our fiscal plans are based on a more conservative oil production increases, though the government intends to be more aggressive in terms of getting help from private oil companies towards increased production levels. This can be both through existing service contracts and to a migration of existing contracts to a new kind of contract. Some presidential decrees already pushed in that regard, and we expect that to be further developed in the coming months. So that's up to that regard on oil production. We expect that to be further increased. And we have had pretty constructive discussions with private oil companies that are eager to find better ways to increase in that regard. Regarding Petroecuador and Petroamazonas, we expect the merging process of both companies to continue. We expect also all their financial statements to be fully audited and advance in that regard. And yes, our objective would be over time to get some sort of maybe eco-petrol type of development in terms of getting a more stronger corporate governance in that company, and gradually for it to be much more able to go to markets, indeed, as you mentioned. This takes some time because this indeed several legal steps and several audit steps and several progresses, but clearly the line goes in that way.
In terms of legal steps, would it require something going to the assembly?
Not necessarily. I mean, we're still looking at it, not necessarily going to that, but ensuring that we get control of some legal issues that are still pending, so that we can move ahead and ensure the progress. So it's not necessarily needed to go to the assembly for that regard.
Well, I know we're at our time. I want to apologize to those attendees who asked very good questions that we couldn't actually have time to get to, and maybe we can circle them all up and get a list sent to you, Mr. Minister. But I do want to be respectful of your time, and I do want to thank you for taking the time with that very comprehensive presentation, but also with your answering of the questions that we were able to pose. I don't know if I should hand it back to you, Maria Rosa, to close the session, but from my perspective, thank you very much.
Juanita, do you have closing remarks that you want to share with the public?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Cueva and Mr. Ramsey. They have been very enlightening discussion and quick session. And thank you to all who asked questions. Like you said, Ben, not enough time, a lot of questions, but I think the minister has been very grateful to answer most of the things that we need to understand and to know about Ecuador. It's nice to hear about new plans for Ecuador's growth and this crucial time. And thank you to all the participants and members of our staff, Alexandra Vaquerizo, Linda Calvet, and Lori Dominguez. As you may know, we have an excited event coming up, and which Maria Rosa will describe more in details. Now I turn the program over to her for the final remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Thank you, Juanita. Yes, I have very exciting news, but Minister Cueva, we need to have you back. As you have seen, you have generated a lot of enthusiasm, and there are many open questions. So we're going to need to invite you back so you can take care of all the requests. Thank you also for sharing a very thorough plan for the future of Ecuador. And we're very impressed with the vaccination achievement and with the speed that the government and your team have moved towards improving Ecuador's presence. So I thank you for that. And I also want to thank Ben Ramsey for his expert moderation. So thank you. And right now I'm going to announce that the Ecuadorian American Association will be hosting an in-person welcoming lunch to His Excellency Guillermo Lasso, President of Ecuador, and he will be our guest of honor and speaker at the Harvard Club of New York on Tuesday, September 21st. So please join us in welcome the new president, and you can do that by responding to the invitation you got for today's event. You can just respond to that and the staff will get back to you.
Maria Rosa, just a piece of news. I think I will be accompanying the president.
Oh, that's wonderful. So we're going to also have the pleasure of meeting you in person. That is wonderful. What a wonderful news. One small pitch. We are a non-for-profit organization, and the support that we get, it's only from membership and sponsorships. So if you want to join the Ecuadorian American Association also, via today's invitation, you can request information. And we're going to be celebrating 90 years. Okay, so thank you so much to everyone for participating, and I look forward to seeing you at the Harvard Club. Thank you, Ministro. Muchísimas gracias. Extraordinario. Gracias, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Gracias,
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Nos vemos. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Gracias.